Hello and welcome to this special conversation on the Digital News Report 2026 with a particular focus this time round on one of the world's most dynamic and diverse markets, India. I'm Mitali Mukherjee, I'm director of the Reuters Institute, and what we do every year is a deep dive into what the findings are from the report, but also what we want to hear from industry voices within key markets, including India. So over the next hour, we're going to look at top-line findings from the report in terms of global trends, and then we're going to look at what that means for India. This year's Digital News Report is marked by volatility in many of the indicators we've been tracking for over a decade now. It is in some ways a reflection of the tumult that we're seeing in terms of the news flow. It is also a reflection of how anxious the news may be making many parts of the public. Interest in news is down in many markets. Trust in news is at the lowest in 11 years. And many people now get their news, as it were, from social media or third-party platforms, which does present a fundamental challenge to news organizations. There is also, and especially for young people in this case, a growing use of AI chatbots for news. It's lots to unpack, and to help understand what these trends are pointing to for the Indian news landscape, I am joined by three sort of very diverse but very seasoned voices. Dhanya Rajendran, who is editor-in-chief and founder of the News Minute. Pradeep, Gairola, who is chief digital business officer at the Hindu Group. And Sannuta Raghu, who has been heading AI at Scroll, which is headquartered in Mumbai but present everywhere, and also a former Reuters Institute fellow. And presenting some of the key findings will be our lead author, Jim Egan. So let's start then with a presentation or almost a scene setting of what the key findings are. Jim, I'm going to pass over to you for that.
Thank you very much, Mitali, and hello everyone. Please allow me to share my screen, and I will take you through an overview of this year's key findings. So let me say a few words by way of introduction, if that's okay, just to talk about the research that we undertake that underpins the report and the analysis that you're going to see. We cover 48 countries or markets, as I will say, in the Digital News Report. This year is the 15th edition of the report, and we're very grateful to all of our sponsors who you can see on the screen who provide the funding to allow this to happen, as now the world's longest running and also the sort of biggest in terms of geographic scope research into what's happening in terms of news consumption and attitudes around the world. We have almost 100,000 people who take part in this research each year across the 48 countries that we cover. In India, we recruit people to take part in the research in the English language. People have the option of taking the study either in Hindi or in English. Most people do it in English. And so the results that you're going to see for India, it's worth bearing in mind that these really represent a principally English-speaking segment of the Indian news market rather than a nationally representative sample. So please bear that in mind as we go through. The other thing to also be conscious of is that the research was done in January, in the first half of February this year, and just sort of have that in mind in terms of like news events and what was happening as we go through. So let me very briefly try to echo some of the things that Mitali has said already about what we see by way of overview. So quite significant moves in many of the data points that we've been tracking for over a decade in this year's research. And we're seeing as the overall theme, this idea of audiences drifting away from traditional sources, including print, TV, radio, and also I think we would now call owned and operated digital news websites and apps as being part of that traditional sources group towards this more platformized news experience on third-party platforms. And as a consequence of that, we're seeing a variety of things. News being more video-led as consumption drifts towards these platforms, creators playing an important role, and AI starting to emerge on the scene as another way that people are accessing their news. This is having a variety of effects, one of which is that trust in news overall is down this year, and I'll go into that in more detail. News is not playing quite the central part that it was before. And all of this, as well as engagement challenges, also has commercial implications as well. But I think it's really important to bear in mind that news is still critical. It's essential to the way that people and communities understand the world and also life in neighborhoods around them. And we see that although trust overall is going down, trust in news brands, generally speaking, is holding up. And people still believe in what news can be and should be. And I think those sort of enduring values and qualities and aspirations are things that are really important. So let me get into some of the detail. I'm going to start out by looking at where people are getting their news and this sort of changing composition in news consumption. This here is a graph that shows us the last 5 years, and this is global data. So I'm averaging out across the 48 markets what's happening. And as you can see here, over the last year, there's been a crossover. So that now at a global level, the social and video networks, by which I mean these major platforms like Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and so on, they are in the lead as the biggest single source of news consumption, ahead of both TV news and these owned news websites and apps for the first time. Also, we're seeing, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here, the usage of AI chatbots is growing. Of course, from a very low base, because these are very, very new on the scene, but now 10% of people globally are starting to get some news through AI chatbots each week. One thing to draw attention to is that news podcasts and the consumption of them hasn't changed year on year. So that's stuck at 11% in 2026. It is higher among our India sample, so 17% of people in our India sample are using news podcasts each week. And part of that kind of relatively slow growth or no growth this year for podcasts may be to do with the way that podcasts are shifting from being an audio proposition to a video proposition that people are consuming kind of like on screens. And we might talk about that a little bit later. I think the best way of understanding this drift from traditional sources to social media and video networks is this chart. It's a bit complicated, so let me explain. We're breaking down people's answers to the question, what is your main source of news by age? So over on the left here, you can see that back in 2021, this is data from 5 years ago, social media was the preferred source for people aged 18 to 24 globally. Actually, all other age groups either preferred owned direct destination news websites and apps or TV. But keep an eye on this chart and see how those staircases shift in terms of their profile between 2021 and 2026. Here you can see quite a dramatic change. And what's been happening is that not only are people migrating from TV towards social media and video networks, and now also AI, but also from these news websites and apps. So we're now in a position where globally, none of these 5 age groups say that they prefer news websites and apps. People up to the age of 44 are saying that social media, video networks, and AI chatbots are their preferred means of consumption. And it's still TV for people in older age groups. And the India data, broadly speaking, is pretty similar to this. Of course, print still plays a bigger role in India. That's not shown here, but it's not a preferred medium for any of these age groups. So this is really a way of capturing this idea of drift and what's going on here. Just to talk about AI chatbot use, as I say, that's grown to 10%. Over the year. Among our India sample, 22% of those individuals are saying they are using AI chatbots for at least some of their news during the week. And you can see in other countries around the world, there are certainly some markets where AI usage has not only grown, but is now becoming really quite significant in places such as South Korea and Brazil, for example. In terms of why people are using AI chatbots, I think no real sort of killer app or use case is yet to emerge. And in this sort of selection of markets here, you can see a variety of different things, which vary from country to country in terms of what people are into. If I was going to generalize, I think there's something about speed, there's something about being able to follow up and to go deep on topics. And also in some markets here, you can see these idea of sort of compilation and summarization being quite useful. But I think this is intriguing that although AI usage is growing for news, there's no real single thing that people have figured out yet as being like a really distinctive way of using AI chatbots to enhance their news experience. I'm going to talk a little bit now about generational differences in consumption, which you saw a bit earlier, but I think looking at some of the US data for the way that audiences in America are following news about the Iran conflict, this generational split starts to come out quite clearly. So when we asked people, and this was done in March, what do you think is the best way of following news about the Iran war? People aged 35 or over, they have this profile. So TV's in the lead, and then you can see these social media and direct news websites. They're kind of neck and neck. It's very different for people who are aged under 35. So about half as many people aged under 35 consume TV. It's double the proportion as far as social media and video networks are concerned. And I think something that's really striking is that you have more people under 35 who say they're not following the news about the conflict at all than are saying that they're using news websites and apps. And this idea that younger people are not sort of moving in the way that those of us who are a bit older perhaps did, from TV to news websites to social media, but going straight to social, I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Part of the reason for that is that some of these younger Americans, so these people aged, here I'm focusing on people aged 18 to 24 in particular, more than a third of them have never regularly watched TV news, and also the same number of people in effect have never regularly used news websites at all. And I think that's really striking thing that we're starting to see in terms of sort of the generational evolution. Let me keep going and start to talk about trust in news. And I think there's a relationship here between what we're seeing about trust in news and some of the data about where people are getting their news from. So Mitali hinted at this a little while ago in terms of year-on-year change, and that's what I'm showing here, changes from 2025 to this year. We're seeing significant drops, and we say a drop of 3 percentage points or more, we count as statistically significant. In 29 of the 48 markets that we cover, including in India, where there was a 4 percentage point drop in trust year on year. So trust overall globally now stands at 37%, which is the lowest since we started recording this figure a decade ago. The figure in India is quite similar to that. So 39% of our Indian respondents say that they trust most news most of the time. So something really quite dramatic going on in terms of trusting news overall. But something that is quite interesting to try to unpick this a little bit is, and I pulled out here the 5 markets where there was the biggest year-on-year drop in trust overall, and you can see these figures here, is if we then look at the data that we get for individual news brands, where we ask people about the top 15 or so news brands in each market, you can see here that the changes in trust for those individual news brands doesn't really tally with the drop in trust overall. And for me, I think the takeaway here is people are becoming concerned about their news and information environment broadly defined in terms of their media life online on their mobile phones and other devices. But even though their relationship may be more intermediated and perhaps more distant with the individual news brands, the trust in those brands is holding up. This is something which is perhaps a slightly technical point, but I think it tries to relate the changing mix of news consumption, which is what is happening to trust overall. So here in purple and in blue, you can see the percentages for people globally who say they trust news that they see either on social media or now on AI chatbots. And as you can see, that's significantly lower than trust in news overall. But as we know, the mix is changing. So as the usage of platforms such as social media and AI goes up and that composition mix shifts, I think it's likely that not only is this 37% trust in news overall at its lowest level to date, but we may well see that number go down in future as consumption shifts more and more to platforms where trust is low. Okay, let's talk a bit more about individual platforms. So if we're seeing consumption shift to these social media and video networks, which ones do we really mean? So here are the figures again at a global level over the last five years for the big platforms. And what you can see here with these green lines that I've indicated is that really this has been a half decade of growth for video networks, because Instagram, TikTok, and of course YouTube, they're principally video led. And that's what we're really seeing is the growth of third-party platforms and ones where video dominates as a format rather than text and audio. And that growth of video, and this is something that I really want to highlight and try to draw home. This is something we see globally as well as in India. That growth in video is all happening off platform. This is a wave that so far it seems publishers have not really been able to jump on and to capitalize on. So here you can see the growth in the percentage of people who say they consume some news video online each week, up from 69 to 77% over the last 5 years. And this is the growth on those social media or video networks. Now, not only have publishers not enjoyed a growth in market share, but the numbers have actually gone down. So despite the fact that video is becoming more and more popular as a news format, people are doing it less in absolute terms on publisher sites. And it's exactly the same in India. So the numbers have gone down from 41% in India in 2021 to 33% in 2026. So this feels like something that is like a really urgent strategic call for publishers, is to figure out how to get online video right, because people are doing more and more of it, but they're not doing it on your sites. YouTube, of course, is really the biggest player for video news, especially in India, where, as you can see, the figures for YouTube news consumption in India are among the highest that we see anywhere in the world. And something I want to talk about here is that online news video consumption, it's not all about short form video. And actually, it's not all about consumption on mobile phones. So TikTok, which of course not operating in India, is predominantly, this is a short form video. So people are consuming videos, or like really short form is the majority use, or video up to five minutes. Whereas on YouTube, you see a much broader spread in terms of video consumption. So nearly a quarter of people are watching videos like this, is starting to get to long form, and a similar percentage are watching live news as well. And if we ask people whether they are watching on their mobile phones or on TV, more than a quarter of people around the world are now saying that they are consuming news video on third-party apps like YouTube. Of course, there are others, on their television sets. So TV news overall in the broadcast paradigm seems to be going down, but it does not mean that news on the television set is dead. In fact, I think this is potentially a new avenue that's interesting for publishers and broadcast news organizations to explore, which seems to be the growth of TV news consumption on the TV set. And this 27% figure that you see here, actually in India, there's a remarkable difference. So in India, among our sample, 55% of people are saying that they are watching on-demand news on an internet-connected TV. Okay, let's move on to creators, because of course creators play a significant role in this new video-led news landscape. So what are we seeing? I've grouped here three different segments of markets in terms of their usage of creators for news, and I'm focusing here not on all types of creators, but creators who specifically specialize in news-focused content. And over here on the left, you can see some of the markets where close to half of people, and as I've said here, the same is true in India, close to half of people are starting to use news creators each week. It's not the same, as you can see over here in markets like Japan, also in Western and Northern Europe, creator usage is much lower. But certainly in some markets, creators are becoming quite significant. But how much impact are they really having? And I think this is something that I want to pause on for a while, because this really matters. And I think the headline here is news creators are playing an increasingly widespread role, but that role is complementary rather than something that is necessarily really eating away at established news consumption. So we asked people, to what extent, if you're using news creators, are they meeting all of your news needs? So a little bit, somewhat, or most, or all of your news needs. And if we add together most or all news needs, 13% of people globally are saying that their news needs are being met by creators. The numbers are higher over here on the left-hand side of the chart. So in India, nearly a quarter of people are saying most or all of my news needs are being met. But if you then break that down again and say, okay, well, how many of you are having all of your news needs met? So in effect, you're not using any other traditional or established news media sources. At the global level, only 3% of people are saying that they're solely reliant on creators. The number, again, is higher in markets such as India, but it's about 10% in India people who are saying, I'm just relying on creators for news. The other way of looking at that is to say that 90% of people in our Indian sample are still using traditional news sources to at least some extent. But what's really interesting, I think, is to say, well, how do people think about creators and how do they stack up against traditional news brands? And we asked people how they would rate creators against these 8 attributes or characteristics of news consumption that you can see on the left-hand side of the chart. When we ask everybody globally what they think, even people who don't, because we have in here people who are not using creators, those who do and those who don't together generally recognize and they understand that creators are easier to understand, they're more entertaining, they're relatable and so on. But there is a perception that on some of those what you might call traditional news values as expertise, impartiality, and so on, that traditional news media is better than creators. The picture's quite different, though, if you just ask people who are consuming content from news creators. In fact, for those individuals, they rate creators as being stronger on all of these attributes. So there's something really interesting going on here. Interest in news is falling. Consumption is falling in some respects for traditional news brands, but on these social media and video networks, creators have found a way of breathing new life into and injecting demand and innovation in a way that's really resonating with these people who are using creators for at least some of their news diet. We did also ask people which creators are you using, and we asked them to name some of them. These are 5 of the individuals who picked up. This is ranking, but these were some of the names that we see most frequently mentioned by our India respondents. I dare say our panelists know who the people are, but there are their names just for anyone who's in any doubt. There's a mix here of people who are coming from different points in the political spectrum. There's a mix of some established and people who sort of made their names on traditional media, as well as people who are breaking out and are newer to the scene and so on. One thing, of course, that there isn't any diversity in is in gender makeup. And this is not just an Indian characteristic. We see it in most markets that the creator landscape is male dominated, and India is not the only market where the kind of the list of top creators is exclusively male. I'll finish up in a few minutes, but just let me talk a little bit about news values. So with all this disruption and turbulence going on, like, do people still believe in news? And one way of looking at it is to ask people, well, what do you think about one dimension? This is only one aspect of impartiality. So do you like the idea that you consume news which doesn't have a particular point of view, or are people increasingly shifting towards a preference for news that shares their point of view in these so-called echo chambers that we've all heard about. So we asked about this in 2020, and half of people in 2020 said that their preference was for news that doesn't have a particular point of view. But there was nearly a quarter of people who said that news that shares their point of view is their preference. So in 2026, I would say overall, this chart tells a story of things not changing very much. So there is a drop from 51 to 48% in people who say that they prefer news that doesn't have a particular point of view. But this has not been reflected in a leap in people saying that they prefer news that shares their point of view. In fact, as you can see here, there's been a fall in this number over the last 6 years. So I think the takeaway from here overall is that a plurality, as we say, or nearly half of people still continue to say that news that doesn't take sides is their preference. And we see this when we ask people what they think about news for them as well as news for other people. We did also ask people what they think about how news actually is alongside how they think news could be or should be. So we picked 6 long-running global stories and we asked people to say whether or not they think the news media is doing a good job of that. And here in India, this is India-specific data, you can see, again, something of sort of the generational differences coming up. So across all respondents, with the exception of the coverage of Donald Trump's second presidency, where a net opinion was split, all respondents generally think that Indian news media is doing a good job. The perspective of the youngest people in the Indian news population is quite different, especially on Donald Trump, in inflation, the cost of living, and the economy. The view is starting to tend towards news media not doing a good job of covering those stories, and that's something you might want to reflect on a bit in your discussions to what the reasons for that might be. So let me just wrap up very briefly now. What's 2026 looking like? News discovery is certainly changing in preference of sort of indirect discovery away from direct discovery on sources like TV, newspapers, and also owned and operated websites. And the AI chatbots are growing fast, but they're not yet really taking over, and I think that's something worth thinking about. Creator consumption definitely growing, certainly in India, but it seems to be mainly complementary rather than substitutional. Video, really important, but it's not all about short form, and it's worth thinking about the television set as a device that continues to play an important role for the consumption of news. And this interesting aspect of trust, where people are definitely becoming less trustful of the news and information environment overall, but trust in news brands appears to be holding up. And let's keep the faith in what news audiences want news to be and what they think it can be, but bear in mind that not everyone is happy with the way coverage is currently happening, as well as age showing some differences. I think political polarization and where those forces are taking hold in some markets is also kind of like making it increasingly difficult for news publishers to address all news audiences and their differing perspectives on some of these big stories. So that's a summary in a page of what I think the data is saying at a global level. I've tried to hint a little bit at what we're seeing in the Indian context as well, and I'll hand it over to you to get into some of this in more detail.
Jim, thanks very much for that. And I'm going to go straight to the panel because there's lots to unpack there. Dhanya, maybe I will start with you on third-party platforms. The News Minute is present across many of these platforms. You've got a really strong sort of 750,000 strong subscriber base on YouTube. So in some ways, you've been present on these platforms. But walk us through what your own experience has been in the last year in terms of what's happening on the news website in terms of traffic versus how you are using, mining, monetizing some of these other platforms.
Okay, so that's a lot of questions in one. The first thing is, the survey itself, what I was taken aback by is the lack of trust that people have in the media. Though it's not surprising to see that the trust is going down further, just alarm bells are ringing in my brain as to how do we salvage the situation, right? That's one. The other thing is, if you look at the India statistics, it says that a lot of people are on YouTube. They're consuming news on YouTube. Now, how do traditional, and it also says that traditional media houses are not capitalizing YouTube as much as content creators. And I think that is applicable even to the smaller organizations like the News Minute. We are not capitalizing it. I think there are many reasons for it. One is, as far as small newsrooms go, it's a question of how many do you have in a newsroom to populate a lot many videos. That's one. And the second is there is a language which a journalism platform can employ versus a language that a content creator can use, right? And many times we don't want certain lines to cross, which is why I would say our videos can sometimes be boring. The same thing can be taken by somebody else, and they can make it look very, very interesting, and they get millions of views. So I think that's the bridge which we are not able to cross as of now. But recently, Mitali, there was one big media organization in India which sent a mail out to all its employees saying that we will move away from news a bit and we will focus on content, and we will work with content creators. Because I think even media organizations have realized that journalists have to be kept aside now a bit, and this is the time for content creators to come. I mean, it's a problem that's evolving, and I don't think we are yet cognizant of how this is going to impact us. We know that our traffic has gone down, and that's a story for everyone. It's not just for small media houses. The other day, I had a meeting with a couple of marketing executives from media houses in India. They had come to our office, and they were all saying that now they're getting penalized for writing stories about a mango falling in New York State. Right? Indian media writes about anything happening everywhere. And now Google has started penalizing them. So that way there's a traffic dip for the bigger sites because they've all been told stick to your area. For us, it's a problem of discoverability. We are not discoverable as the others are. And I think that problem has just been increasing over the years. And the only solution for us has been to shift from text to video. Now, when you shift from text to video, also, there is a huge competition there where there are more and more content creators coming in. And like Jim was saying, this survey was mainly done among people who can reply in Hindi and English. But India has such a large audience, millions and millions of people who are consuming news. And I would say they are much more robust consumers of news than the English and English speaking population. They consume it by the minute, right? People are on Instagram all the time or whatever social media. And I actually don't know how we are going to compete with all this. And
just to clarify as well, as you said, Dhanya, most of the respondents were in English, not in Hindi, and it does tend to sort of overrepresent for digital platforms and less so for traditional. But let me ask you a quick follow-up question, which is that it's not just YouTube for India as a market. Spaces like WhatsApp and Instagram are also growing, and growing at a pretty fast clip. How much time and resources does a smaller sized outlet like yours sort of spend in providing content on these third party platforms, and what is the goal there? I guess is the goal to sort of bring traffic back to your news website, and has that been successful?
I think there are multiple layers to this. One, of course, is that from concentrating on our video input or output, let's say, which was 20% a few years ago, now we are almost at 50%. We also know that the long form stories we write, the investigations we do, it reaches more people when we do video. So our effort has been put it out also on video and then draw at least a few of them back to reading the text. But what's really baffled me in the last 6 months is this boom of carousels, right? You take Twitter, you take Instagram especially, everybody is using text carousels, including an organization like The Hindu, which should essentially ask people to come to their site or their newspaper to read. They now put the carousels for the articles, which means there are 5 or 7 or 8 slides where everybody just gets the material they want and nobody wants to read the article. So I feel like we are innovating more and more in a way that is telling people no need to come to the website or the newspaper, instead just look at our carousel. So I feel like these are things that news organizations should not be doing.
It's a good setup for Pradeep himself. Pradeep, you've pointed to up until the time of COVID, even print actually being quite robust in terms of the trends for India as a market, and in some ways you've been leading innovation, which was the journey for a mainstream brand like Hindu from print into digital and now into some of these third-party platforms. Do you want to respond first to Dhanya's point about the fact that the impetus now is to be on the third-party platform and reach the audience there versus drawing them into a newspaper or a website or a television channel?
So Mitali, see, like if I look at the last 3 to 4 years, unlike most of the other news sites, we haven't seen any decline in our traffic. Actually, if it has increased, though marginally, right? If you look at our footprints on social media, they are increasing dramatically. About 25 million people follow the Hindu brand across various social media platforms, and this would have grown to about, at least by 5 to 10 million in the last 1 year itself, right? On YouTube in March, we crossed about 2 million subscribers for the Hindu main channel, and we also have one more channel called Original, right? So we have a Hindu has about 2.4 million subscribers only on YouTube. We see each of these property as an island, and we don't really want people to travel from one source to another, because that creates a inertia, right? So each of the platform is today developing itself as an island. So even when we send the newsletter, we don't want people to come to click a news and come to us. We want to have a news which is completely complete at that particular, even as as an email, right? So that's one insight which we have, that whenever we have tried to ask people to come, it doesn't result into much of a translation. When we look at social media, the growing, we are very, very positive about it, right? So we think that, as a company, we have always believed for the country like India, which is 1.45 billion people, right? It requires not 100, but millions of outlets to really do the justice to the democracy. We always believe that the democracy like India needs a multiple level of journalism, and we can only do a one part of it, which might be, say, a national, right? But we feel that the platforms have done a great job in distribution, right? And we just hope that they create enough incentives for the creators to keep creating the content. If you go to the internet, that point in time they rewarded velocity over truth. But now with the AI coming in, their own existence being threatened by the synthetic content and all that, we just hope that they reward the original journalism of the creators. We hope that they create a good incentive picture. Ideally, we would want the platforms to act like, if you look at say a mobile, they look at apps as a larger ecosystem for themselves, like an infrastructure layer. We want that platform should really look at the creators as a larger infrastructure layer. See, just to give you like how badly anyone is positioned to serve this country, in India there are 0.25 million panchayats. Okay, that's the lowest level of the administrative setup in the country. They have 2.5 million elected people, or panch as they are called. The total Indian government spends about 500 to 600 billion dollars of distributed money through this platform, and there's no accountability because the hyperlocal journalism has failed miserably, right? So that's where we are very, very hopeful that this distribution, like it's amazing that so many people are joining in this creator network. So see, like all India registered number of titles in India is 1.4 145,000 in last 75 years, right? But if you see this number, it's a very, very positive number. We feel that we just hope that these ecosystems really create a reward, because ultimately journalism is not attracting the best of talent because the reward mechanism is not there. So if they can solve for that and they treat it as a larger ecosystem, everybody will benefit.
You raise an important point about hyperlocal journalism, and to be sure, it doesn't capture, our findings don't capture what's happening at sort of a local language level, and that should definitely be kept in mind. I want to dwell for a minute, Pradeep, on the point you made about actually seeing website traffic grow. Do you mind sharing some details on what you would put that down to? Have you sort of seen more traction for long form stories? Is it video? Because you were one of the first movers amongst traditional mainstream organizations to actually go paywall with your content as well.
I think, for the entire lifetime of Hindu, when the internet started, there was this entire thing about the medium is the message. that created a new layer of journalism in India called ABCD: astrology, Bollywood, cricket, and devotion, right? And a lot of, so basically that started by the news owners thinking that what are people searching. They said that the maximum search is happening for four things, which is celebrities, cricket, which is a religion, devotion, and all that. So they started creating content for that. Didn't believe. Hindu felt that the we have a story, and we will each story a medium lens. We will use each medium to tell a story in the best possible manner. So they didn't create this layer. So the initially around 2015 to 2019, we were severely punished for this, right? So the channels were rewarding velocity. If some big event has happened, keep creating, whether it has any relevance or not, whether it is, So we did not do it. We have a policy of not covering the personal life of film stars and so celebrities. We stuck to our principles. So now what is happening? It's not so much to do with us, but I think the way we never change is actually rewarding, because in a era when people with especially synthetic content and all that, now when the platform is really scared of this kind of a content explosion, they are actually sticking to a lot more original content, like the players like us. I think we are not to be so much to be said that we did something great. I think we just stuck to our principles. That's it.
Sanu, you've been looking at AI innovation, and as Jim shared, there's clearly kind of an openness to experimentation in India as a market, as is the case across many markets in Asia. Can you walk us through sort of concretely a couple of experiments that you have trialed at Scroll, and what sort of response you've got around that?
Sure. And, to echo both Pradeep's and Dhanya's point, we're in a very, very, very large and complex and complicated market, right? So about 5 years ago, we stopped chasing breaking news because it's a very, very cluttered market, right? We said this was a very conscious decision, saying there are a lot more players in the market doing breaking news. Yes, it will give you the initial eyeballs, but we're not going to do that because that's not what we're good at. Plus, we don't have the resources to divert towards that and make the ground reportage part, which is sort of our bread and butter, not give resources to that. So that was a very conscious decision. And over the last 5 years, by a lot of trial and error and sort of this AI experiments that we've been conducting over the last 4 years, what this has told us is that our audience is a very, very specific type of audience, and that is sort of researchers, academics, embassies that study South Asia very deeply, right? So that we have been able to identify with almost precision. They're able to pay for our work and all of that. So the latest thing we're building, again, we've had quite a journey with AI experiments we've built text to video about 3 years back, 4 years back. We moved on to text to interface. Then we went into, how do we architect our archive? How do we create structured data? Because that's sort of the main currency now in how agents will interact with our material. We've gone down that road. And what we've now landed on and what we're building is basically a trusted workspace for these people who pay for our work. And what that means is, so if I were to contrast, so today, if you take something like a Claude, right, which a lot of researchers, a lot of policy analysts are already using to create hyper-personal briefs and reports. These are very contextualized. You get these on demand. They can be scheduled to reach your inbox or your Telegram bot at a certain time. So what are we as an organization, or what can an organization like us really provide in this market where, like Jim said, and what we've understood over the past year or 2 years is that we've lost control of distribution. We're also now losing control of interpretation, right? So what can we build for our users in this space? So we landed on how do we create a trusted workspace that is that provides an auditable, comprehensiveness that something like a Claude and other chatbots and agentic systems provide. How do we provide an accountable environment so that these researchers can trust what is available within our entire archive? Plus, we're very open about the fact that we may not cover every aspect of the story, so we are able to curate and pull from what David Caswell has called societal information, which is, are you able to pull from a data set? Are you able to pull from a government document and close the gaps that an organization has usually, and then make it comprehensive? And the third part of this system of a trusted workspace is to create a system of record, because again, the ecosystem we are moving towards is there's going to be very little difference between primary and secondary data, right? So we are creators of primary data, and we are very, very cognizant of that. How that primary data gets surfaced to the internet today is by the medium of an article and an article container, right? But if you expose to these agents who are going to come to your site a reported fact, a summarized, sort of synthesized version of an AI summary, some sort of a brief that is again generated by AI, a data set, all this becomes this big soup where an agent really isn't able to tell at this juncture what is primary and what is secondary, right? So how do you create a system of record? So I think that is the big thing that news organizations will need to work at, is we're already creating a verified, fact-checked, there's skilled editorial labor working on creating primary data. How do we make it more sustainable in this broader system of record, accountable environment, auditable comprehensiveness? And then we're creating a trusted workspace around this where our users are able to annotate things in the workspace and make notes and things like that.
Pradeep, I'm assuming it wasn't you that sent that email that Dhanya was referring to, but let me ask you about how traditional mainstream brands are thinking about partnering with news creators, because there's different ways that we're seeing in terms of experiments, which is kind of building journalists within the newsroom to be more creator style, or partnering on specific issues. Is that something you're looking at? Do you see that as an important track to go down, or are you sort of keen on sort of staying with the map that you have worked with so far in terms of how you do your journalism and the journalists that you work with?
See, as of now, the editors have not decided to get the outside creators, but some creators approach us for, and then they are ready to create content as per our requirement. So those kinds of creators we are working, but they exclusively produce for Hindu in this particular case, in these kinds of cases. As of now, we are not experimenting with it because so I think there is a lot more. We just started getting into this space very recently, especially in the video. And there is so much to be discovered within the organization because there's so much of talent. So so there are some people who never face camera, and now they are almost like a pro. They have such a great following. So one of our colleagues is who does a Tamil Nadu show. First time he came in front of a camera about a year back. Now today, if you see each of his videos performance, right? And this is not an isolated case. There are so many people who are coming forward, who are recording, and we can see so as of now, we have not been able to even tap the entire talent which we have within our organization. So see, like Hindu is a large organization. Overall, if you see we have about 750 odd journalists across the organization, right? But out of them, maybe today, not more than say 10, 15 people are recording it. So there is a huge opportunity for our people to really go in front of the camera, learn from this, and then perhaps, if we start feeling that there is a further need to do it, yes, we have, as of now, there is our hands are full. And also, let me tell you that the monetization of videos is extremely poor. So your ROIs from videos are, so if our ROI from videos not even 10% of the cost, right? So if I'm spending 100 rupees, I'm not able to get even 10 rupees out of videos. So this has to change. So we are working simultaneously on, with some of the consultants and others to figure out that how do we enhance the monetization, we know that this is a mutual, this is a requirement. We want to, and our editors believe that they should not be ever telling the stories with like we need to communicate. They need to narrate great stories. Whatever be the medium, we need to really adopt to that particular medium. So when it comes to Insta, we are in a particular way. When it comes to YouTube, we are trying to go in a different way. Right, but larger thing is, as of now, we want to play a large play in video. The Hindu editor has a very large ambition as far as
sorry to interrupt you, sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, can you repeat again, sir? Your audio is so bad at that time.
Yeah, but I don't know where is this but coming across all the times, like when our mics are closed also, I think each time there is this kind of suddenly we hear a lot of this background noise.
Sir, can you please repeat the last two lines?
Yeah, I do that. So as far as video is concerned, we understand it's a very important medium. We want to scale up. The Hindu editor wants to really scale up dramatically, and we have already started putting the footprints. But as of now, we do, we will like to really find the talent within the organization. We have a very large pool of talent, and then perhaps will be the opportunity to work closely with the creators. But a lot of creators take our content. Some of the biggest creators take our content and make videos around them. So we will keep seeing them giving a lot of reference to Hindu from time to time. But that's more like they deciding to pick up our content and trying to make stories out of it. Actually, if you will go to YouTube and just try to look at for the Hindu, you are unlikely to get the Hindu channel, because every day there will be more than 100 odd creators who interpret the Hindu's editorial. So these people also act as a great medium for our marketing, and we are quite happy with it.
Jim, one of the things we didn't get to touch upon in the overall findings is news avoidance, which is something we track every year, and that as well has seen an uptick. Do you want to sort of give a quick, a quick note on that, and then I'll go back to my panelists with some of the more difficult questions.
Yeah, news avoidance, we measure it in terms of people who say that they sometimes or often avoid the news. The global figure this year is 42% of people saying that there are times or there are frequent periods when they avoid the news. We first started tracking this in 2017. The figure was 29%, so it has gone up from 29 to 42% over the last 9 years. Hasn't changed much in India this year. And another, I suppose, sort of related metric is sort of concerns about fake news and people seeing misinformation online. Again, not much change in India this year, but India is one of the markets where people do report relatively high levels of concern about fake news. It's I think it's 58% this year in India. So people are certainly worried about the authenticity of what they see online, and people in India and elsewhere do sometimes just decide the news is simply too much and I'm just going to avoid it.
And higher than global levels with news avoidance as well at over sort of 50%. Dhanya, as promised, the difficult ones for you, which is that you raised the point about trust. And in some ways for India as a market, it's really intertwined with this conversation about impartiality as well. How would you define the nature of this very diverse market at this point, where there are certainly schisms that exist within the media structure itself, and where there are sort of clear lines drawn in terms of taking a particular stand, either politically or on any other account, frankly?
So about trust, like Jim told us, that number has been going down steadily every year. And in a world full of disinformation, misinformation, I believe that the one leverage or currency which a media house has is trust. So when that goes down, the immediate challenge is how to bring it back. I was actually looking at the survey and I was quite amused. When you look at the trusted sources in India, I saw Republic, BBC, NDTV, all in the same range. With the Hindu, the Indian Express, the Times of India, I think doing a little bit more. So I was wondering, how exactly is the Indian population looking at partiality and impartiality? I'm very confused. And the two independent organizations which are there in that, I think then at least of one, I know the number has gone down in the last few years. Therefore, are people viewing all these media houses as the same, right? I think there's a clear, the clear problem here is also media literacy. Now, there are media houses in India which are partial to one side, the others who are in the middle, I feel. And then there are the others who are extreme on the third side, right? But people don't see these differences much. They are consuming most of this news, and it's like first come, first serves. They just believe whoever news comes on their feed first. That's, I think, the first danger where we should have media literacy. And yes, this partiality or polarization that you talk about, I think that's also severely divided the Indian market. So those people who are media literate, who understand this is how media houses function, they are now making choices. They're making choices and they're labeling people under right, left, middle, etc. And then they go and consume news because they know this is a viewpoint that I may get there. So all of us are getting labeled under one or the other, which I think is another danger. And I think that's not a problem only in India, but it is across the world. When Mr. Pradeep was talking, I was actually doing the calculation. Imagine for him, the issue is that he has to first figure out the talent within the Hindu because he has 750 journalists. So I was quickly calculating, in the News Minute has 3% of the Hindu staff. So my confusion is not at all figuring out a talent in the News Minute. My confusion is how to make sure this 25 to 30 people I have produce a lot of content so we can compete with not just the Hindu, which has 750 people and is discovering new talent every day, but the 750 other content creators who have just burst into the scene. And some of them do such fantastic work. There's absolutely no doubt about it, right? So like Sannuta said, the problem is multi-layered. And the solution cannot be us figuring out one way. It has to, I think, keep on evolving.
Dhanya and Pradeep, if you want to exchange emails, let me know. I can set
and
that
he
up.
didn't send that email. He didn't send the email I was talking about.
One more question for you, Dhanya, because you've been founding chairperson of the DigiPub News India Foundation. For those that don't know, it's an umbrella organization that sort of represents and advocates for digital-only news outlets. And I think one of the things we've explored in this report specific to India is sort of how much policy has been changing in terms of actually making much harder for news outlets, with specific reference to the IT intermediary guidelines and the digital media ethics code. I'd really want you to give sort of people listening and watching a snapshot of where things stand and what the potential implications can be for news outlets, particularly because for a lot of markets across Europe and others, India is almost looked at right now as an example of what sort of policy changes can be explored while trying to better control the content online.
Better control is the right word. In fact, the internal joke among us is that if the government tries to bring in a new policy or new law, it's not because the government wants to uniformly apply to everybody. They have 10 targets in mind or 50 targets in mind, which are mainly some of the digital portals and a few newspapers, let's say, television channels, nobody's a target. And therefore, they bring these laws so that sometime in the future, they can make sure that these laws are used to target these people. Now, in the last 5 years, I can't even remember how many times we have gone to court now. We just filed a new litigation against the DPDP Act, the Privacy Act, which takes away a very important whistleblower protection away from journalists. We are in court against digital media rules. We are preparing ourselves to go to court against the broadcast rules. There is something called there is a portal in India where all police officers, any government department can go and raise complaints and they just remove social media links. We have been in court in that case, but we did not get any relief from the court. So it's a constant battle, and India is not the place that any country should be wanting to emulate from when it looks for policies on how to build its media. But like you said, if it's about controlling the media, then well, yes, please to study our laws because they have gone deep into how to make sure that things are very difficult, even for the smallest media house.
Sanu, just by eyeballing, you have been voted youngest news person on this panel, and maybe best sort of positioned to speak on young audiences. On the point that Jim raised about how young people feel about some of these fundamental stories, which really sort of, to my mind, are a red thread across the world. What do you think news organizations can be thinking about doing differently while reporting on these subjects? And I've got a particular eye on the cost of living crisis, and the unemployment situation, which is a really, really aching nerve, I think, for India's young population.
I think one of the things Jim said in the presentation, which I really believe in, is that journalism is far from irrelevant, but the value has shifted elsewhere, right? It's not that the work we're doing is not useful to young people or any user that comes to our site or consumes us wherever, right? I think the real shift in terms of, and all of us, like including the Hindu, News Minute, Scroll, we're all doing very important stories. And going by what Dhanya has told us, I think we need to speak more about how difficult it is to do this on a daily basis, and how difficult it's getting every day, right? And we're sort of going out there, putting out these stories, and making sure the information is in the public domain. So the stories that are being covered, so it's not like stories about cost of living crisis are not being covered by everybody in the room here. I think the problem again comes back to distribution and the system we are moving towards. I don't know if everybody in the room here has seen the Nothing phone. And so what this phone essentially does is it's able to create disposable, contextual, hyper-personal apps on the fly, right? So this is like any app that you have. So it creates a widget on your phone. And my assumption is that this technology will be available to sort of all phones in the next 2 years, right? So if you can say things like, I'm diabetic, I need all the information and policies and news around insulin pricing and insulin policies to be given to me in this moment on sort of, and ping me when something interesting happens. So this sits on your home screen and you can just click it and the information is fed to you. So, and this is information that's coming not from one source, but from multiple sources. And that's the ecosystem we're really moving towards. And young people, as we have seen from the survey, are going to embrace this technology, hop over the news media websites and embrace some of these very frictionless, very hyper-contextualized technologies in a very, very, with open arms, essentially. So how are we going to feed that system in a way that preserves the sort of editorial logic, the intuitiveness, the trust signals, the accountability that we bring with our work, right? And like Dhanya was talking about media literacy, all of this is going to transfer over to those systems as well. It's frictionless, it's one click, and all this is built on the foundations of the work that we are creating every day, right? So I think we need to really, really give thought to how we're going to crack distribution once the destination versus utility question comes in for the news industry, right? And it's not a zero-sum game. Like I said, we're specifically working towards, okay, who is this one user that is going to use our platform as a destination and why are they coming to us? So you be very, very sure about that, be very certain about that. But in the broader sense, how are you also dealing with the utility market, right? And I think that is the bigger question on my mind currently.
Mitali, I just have a quick point to make. So first thing, Sannuta has really scared me. I'll have to now go Google what is this Nothing phone and think of, oh my God, is that the next problem in my life? But I feel when it comes to younger population, we are looking at them. See, initially we were thinking, do they even read news? Are they bothered about it? Now we are being told that perhaps a lot of them are reading news. There are surveys showing us that. But we still look at them as a distribution problem, largely. We there's not enough time and space in the newsroom to think how to tailor a story for a certain age population, right? Should we write a story differently? Let me tell you, in the meeting which I had with some of the Indian newspapers, one of the newspaper people said that they have AI, which now does sentimentality analysis. So if a person logs in and they are young and they don't like violence, the copy will change for them. And an older person who's used to more violence will get a more violent copy. So there are people thinking about these things, but the solution is, I would say, silly. It cannot be an AI rewriting copies according to people's sentimentalities. But as an audience, we are only looking at them as a distribution problem, not perhaps as someone who we should cater to in different ways.
Pradeep, final word with you. There's quite a few different strands that we've pulled at through the course of this conversation. If you had to kind of map out priorities for your quite large 750 people strong organization for the rest of the year, what would you say would be priority between thinking about AI, thinking about young audiences? And I do want to take a second to sort of recognize the backdrop against which many news publishers in India work. We're speaking in the context where Prabir Purkayastha, who was running a news organization, has been cleared by the Delhi High Court while, having spent 6 months in jail for what the court themselves called completely flimsy causes. So there is that sort of real environment in which journalists in India function. What would you say are priorities for you as an organization?
See, as far as young population is concerned, this country is so young that I don't think that's the definition of young itself is when you said young, I was wondering, are you talking about teenagers? Are you talking about below 45? Are you talking about, because in like 70 to 80% of our audiences are below 35, 45, and which will be defined as young in the most of the countries, right? So the young at this point in time, if you ask me a problem, it might be a teenager rather than really the age-related issue. Most of our audience is very young. So that's not a problem as of now, unless we start relooking at the young definition and start going after the ages below 20, that might be an opportunity. The biggest problem we have to solve for is sustainability, right? So how do we really, it's a very large, it's a 150-year-old newsroom with still has about 83% dependence on the in the print revenue, right? And it needs to cultivate more sources. So sustainability is the single biggest problem to solve for us, because we know that the paper is there for some time, but definitely nobody can predict how long, what kind of a run is available to the paper, right? So that the digital has to take over has to build the economics which can sustain the newsroom. That's the single biggest priority of this organization. We feel AI is a very large opportunity, not only so we feel that they will be the second biggest consumer for us after the subscribers. We feel that the revenue mix, and I think that every newsroom in this country should block AI other than Google, because Google is the only company which is trying to have a meaningful relationship with publishers. Other than that, we have blocked everybody. And then, of course, it's a thing that they are so smart that every time we realize that somebody has our access to our content, and then we have to again figure out how to block them. This robo.txt and all that doesn't work. With the AI companies are too smart to really, and they have a clear intent that they have to take away the content. So that's some of the bigger ones are following some rules, but there are hundreds which are not, right? So number one priority for us to build sustainability. Number two priority is to how to get these AI companies to the discussion table, because they constantly try to tell us that you are not important, you are less than 5%, which is absolutely wrong, because we have done enough work to understand how this 12-13 trillion industry depends on this industry for its own survival. So we are doing a lot of work on that. So that's the second big thing for us, will be to get the AI companies to the discussion table or a negotiation table. And third, of course, is that we need to keep on nurturing our audiences, right? We do not have a challenge of disappearing audiences. We have to really see, when this paper was created in 1878. At that point in time, the owners, or the 6 people who founded it, could have chosen Tamil, which would have given them a bigger reach, but they chose English because they chose influence. So influence is one of the large things which we work upon, and that can only be created with a very high quality level of journalism. Our third challenge will be, how do we retain and attract the best talent in journalism? and keep this place interesting for them to work with us.
Pradeep, Sannuta, Dhanya, Jim, thank you very much for joining this conversation today. As always, I think our hope is that our findings provide the much needed context for news organizations to build their priorities on, and that they are a barometer of where trends are changing and hopefully help shape your decisions into the next year. But thank you very much for joining us today. From the Reuters Institute team, it's goodbye, and stay across our work, of course.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Dhanya. Thanks, Mita.
Thank you all very much.